Cool. Thank you for having me here today. As a network engineer, I used to attend LINX. I've been to a few in London, but this is the first time I've been to the one in Manchester. So having the opportunity to be here with you today is... I have to stand behind here? Cool. Fantastic. Let me get back one for that. Okay. So I'm Stuart Clark. I work for Cisco, and I work for Cisco DevNet, or the developer program, and I'm a network automation evangelist. And a lot of people ask me what that means, and I can thankfully tell you that it doesn't mean that I'm going to bang on your door at Sunday morning, early hours, hand you a leaflet, and try and convince you that YAML is a programmable language, and then walk away quickly. But what it does mean is, at Cisco DevNet, we help everybody in the community build network automation and programmability, and we help people who are getting started, intermediate people, expert people, whatever you need to get started with automation and programmability. And we work very closely with all the different business groups across Cisco, mostly to do with the APIs, to help promote these across. And then we build content, we do workshops. We're heavily big at Cisco Live. We have our own events globally around the world. And then we hold things like co-create for the SEs, and then the SEs then run things like DevNet Express then to bring this out to the partners and to the big wide world. And we have close to now 1,000 learning labs, and we back all this up with a sandbox. So kind of gone are the days of where you've got to have the hardware either in your facility if you wanted to try something, or you was like me back in the day who had 15 routers in the living room next to the TV, which my wife absolutely adored and loved. So we started really with DevNet is pushing through sort of network as code and what is network as code. And so the game plan today is just to talk about some of the tools that we use across that to actually build the infrastructure and some of the things that we talk about and we demo. And then what is infrastructure as code, the benefits of code management, and the sort of the recipes and manifest playbooks and the tools that actually go with that. Some of them you'll be familiar with, like Puppet and Chef, SaltStack and Ansible. And we use these all the way across the board for building things and demoing. So what are the infrastructure of code configuration management? So if you look at the definition in Wikipedia, and I always read this one out when I'm doing any of my first slides at Cisco Live or any of the events about exactly what infrastructure of code actually is. And then some of the principles of network of code, which we always kind of follow up on, is how you need to now start storing your source control in things like Git and using machine-readable code instead. Back in the day when I started at Cisco, we stored all of our running configs pretty much just as plain text. And we stored them all in an SVN file, or we stored them on an FTP, or we stored them on a wiki page or something like that. And they soon just became out of date, and we couldn't use them. So then what we moved to was treating the source code as a single area of truth. And this became true for things like deployments. It became true for QA, new site builds, refreshes, and that kind of stuff. So no longer were we working with 3 different templates which were out of date, where the data center team had one template, the network team had another one, the QA had another one, and then operations had another one on top of that. And that becomes tricky when you're starting to build more and more sites, which we were doing. Then we started, instead of copy-pasting stuff into the console, as we've known before, when we got console access or management access and just copying things in blindly, we then started to go on to doing this programmatically via APIs and via the tooling instead. So then using everything that we had in GitHub, we would then bring the site up, and once the site was up, then run everything from this source of truth. So then we'll look at now exploring the configuration management tooling. One of the things we started to do was we wanted to have a more of a CI/CD environment, which you'll all be familiar with: continuous integration, continuous deployment. Some of us don't have the luxury of having an exact replica or model of your network stack that you're deploying out there in the wild, and so people turn to modeling tools. We started to look at a couple of them, and then we decided to go with Viral. And as you're familiar probably with Viral, is that a lot of the stuff is done through the GUI. But being network engineers, we wanted to do pretty much all of this from the command line. So we got together with a bunch of engineers and developed something called Viral Utils. And this makes it really, really easy to spin up a mock or a template of your current existing network, or what you've got in production, or what you're planning to put into production, or anything from testing. And you can spin this up within an instance. The Cisco Virals util is actually all built in Python, and you can just go to there, you can pip install it, and then you can get started with it. There's a whole bunch of information actually in there on how to use it, and then some great examples as well. Moving on from that, on top of using Viral utils, once the network was basically up and we'd added the base configuration and we'd got our management network on there, we were then able to run Ansible playbooks. And the reason for running Ansible was that we found it was agentless. There's great support within the network community. As you know, it's written in Python. And for me, when I came from a non-programming background 2 years ago, this was really easy for me to get started with and spin up and actually get my network programmability skills started. For me, this was fantastic because what it removed from is this kind of hand-to-hand combat that I was used to and so many of us are now familiar with within the networking industry. Well, I was constantly logging into things, like I said, copy and pasting things into things, trying to troubleshoot things if somebody's made a change. How do I go back and see that? And we moved from this old sort of dinosaur method, if you will, onto going on to doing more configuration management via the tools. And by doing this, we was able to see a few of the things that you'll see on the screen now. The software and versions installed for doing sort of QA checking and things like that, attributes, names, and ownership, and feature-specific configurations. One of the things that I found working with Cisco is that, and sitting in the security arm of Cisco, is that often we get PCERT or CCERT things saying that we need to check for images for bug scrubs for, you know, I don't know, SSL bleed or something like that. And we have to go across our network. That's great, but we've got 3,000 devices, and we have to go across all of those devices. And you know, my manager wants it back by the end of the day for his manager who wants it for the security architect. So being able to go across all of those things and check, instead of having to rely on a wiki page or something that's out of date or a spreadsheet that's out of date, just being able to run that became really helpful to us. Also, I was able to pass that line of code on and say to my manager, if you want to find out what images are being run, just run this piece of code. I could then leverage that and tell the security architect, if you want to find out, then you don't have to log a ticket with us in ServiceNow or Jira, and it doesn't have to go through the hoops to actually get there. You can run that, and you can check it against what you're seeing as the image that has the potential issue, and whether we're running it or not, more importantly. So benefits of configuration management. When I was at Cisco in my last business unit, we embarked on a project to build 40 new data centers, and it was really ambitious because we wanted them in 18 months, and they were replacing the legacy data centers what we had. We had a data center team that would actually fly out to the site, and they would meet the equipment there. But as we know, when you're shipping stuff, you know, across the world and things, your stuff doesn't always get there on time. We've had loads of stuff that's been delayed in customs. Stuff's been split up along the way. And then some of the stuff's arrived, and then some of the stuff hasn't. This will sound like a frequent story to most of you. So instead of having 5 days to actually bring this data center up and migrate from the legacy data center onto the new data center, we had basically our time then condensed down from sort of 5 days to get this data center up and running and migrate all of the customer traffic across to it, to what could be anywhere from 3 days to 48 hours. Worst case scenario, I think one time we had about 36 hours to build an entire network, which consisted of, I think, close to about 12 devices, and then swing the traffic from the old site to the new site as well. So by building the environment in the viral instance that I spoke to you about before, having all the configurations stored as code, as soon as the data center team landed and got the network management up, they could step back and just let us push everything to it. Not only have we just pushed everything to it as well, we're saving the QA team a job as well. The QA team then don't have to go in there and actually go through everything for them as well, because the QA is done automatically when that is deployed. So we were able to quickly provision infrastructure, and was able to decrease the amount of time that the data center team spent on site. My favorite one is this one, is no more snowflakes. And snowflakes, as we know, just appear in the network. Somebody puts them in, and you ask, and nobody's going to raise their hand. And if you're working with a globally dispersed team, such as I was, and you've got 6 people in Asia Pac, and then you've got half a dozen people in America, and then again the same in Europe area, you're working across different time zones, this little snowflake pops up into the network, and you often ask yourself how it got there. The other one for me is when you're called at 2 a.m. in the morning by somebody on a different time zone, and you're the on-call engineer, and you get up, stumble, trip over the dog, fall over the kid's Lego, find your way to your office or kitchen or wherever you work from at home, put a little snowflake change in, like a static root ACL or something like that, and go back to bed. Wake up the next day, take the train to work, walk straight into the office into an outage or something like that, and that snowflake remains and it falls to the back of your mind. Most of the time I have trouble remembering what I have for breakfast, let alone what changes I made at 2 a.m. in the morning. So again, we got rid of the snowflakes. And by doing that, what we was doing was every time we pushed a change across the entire network, we were replacing the entire configurations. So there's a difference between doing a full replace and a merge, and we opted to go down the full replace road to eliminate snowflakes across the board. And that can all happen when you're using version control, as we know. So we store pretty much everything again in GitHub to start with, and all the changes were pushed from GitHub. So we knew pretty much everything that GitHub was our single source of truth. And any time any changes had to be made across the network to actually get there, we made changes within GitHub. And then those changes are pushed out to the network when they're made. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. Our infrastructure was quite fast-paced. We had global team, SRE around the world, making requests and changes a lot of the time, a lot of ACL changes. We had a huge firewall estate, and it became really problematic to manage this. It becomes really easy for us, an SRE team, to all of a sudden just put 8 requests in your queue with a priority of 48 hours for you to push through that. But then when you've got to log into 500 firewalls globally and make that change, it becomes really problematic. So the automation actually sped up the process, but then using version control, we were able to put those things into the version control and then push those changes out incrementally. We never really got too comfortable with the idea of taking 5 changes and just pushing it all in one go to 500 devices, because potentially then you've got over 2,000, different 2,000 sort of areas where something's broken, and then where do you go? Where do you look to actually start troubleshooting the issue? What's actually broken it? So we push small incremental changes all the time through version control. And some of the commonalities that when we was actually looking to use this, as I said, we started with Ansible. Our SRE manager came to us, and when we started the automation journey, and asked us, did we need help with this? He's got SRE guys who are really skilled with Puppet and Chef and SaltStack and things like the like. But as a network engineer, my team had never been really exposed to any of these tools. We'd dabbled in these, in our home sort of space and in our home time and things like that. It became fun to play with, but we'd never really used them. So we started with, like I mentioned before, sort of Ansible. And, some of the benefits of using, some of the benefits of using, the tools above are the open sourceness, the automation, idempotent behavior, facts, and you can pull lots of facts back from your network, and I personally love facts. And the modules and libraries. A lot of the stuff that we installed later down the line when I was talking about Viral, and then we moved on to use Napalm, a little bit familiar with down the line, and then we also migrated to use something called PyATS, which is a Cisco Python library for doing like a QA thing, if you're familiar with the likes of Behave or Cucumber or something like that. PyATS is a fantastic library which is really easy to get up and running. And we used those libraries across the board then and integrated those within all the different sort of components. So just a quick sort of like matrix of all of these things and stuff that I spoke about before, and some of the reasons for just going with them when you're sort of like comparing them and going towards the leadership and saying we want to run network automation, these are the things that we want to use. And we had the other managers in there whose teams did a lot more automation. And this is kind of like the burn down of what we decided, of what we wanted to do and the things we wanted to move into. And saying to our leadership at the time, these are the ones we actually feel more comfortable with actually doing, and the ones that we can actually get up and running and deploying stuff straight away. So that was fairly quick. As we mentioned before, I was going to do a little demo. So some of the things we just covered on the screen there is what was infrastructure as code management and the benefits of code management. and the recipes and playbooks and the tools that, as a network engineer, then I've all of a sudden become exposed to. And these are the things that, across the board, that DevNet is building the learning labs and everything to help people, no matter what level you're at, become familiar with these tools. And then finally, we talked a little about the configuration management with the Ansible example, which I was speaking about, of how we actually ran this across the board, across the network, and some of the things that we do to encourage people to start this journey on network programmability. So what to do next? I put a whole bunch of sort of links up on the screen there from the things that we present across all the different events across the world. There's loads of different links you'll be able to click on here. A lot of these link back to DevNet, where there's lots of examples and things. And no matter if you're on your journey of programmability or whether you're sort of way ahead of that and you're an expert in that, there's some great things and tools to look at in there. And there's some great support for the Cisco APIs. So up on the screen, there's all my contact details. That is my genuine email address and my Twitter handle, Big Evil Beard. I'm not going to change that, even though HR think I ought to. But that's going to stay. I can take any questions if you like.
Okay.
Silence is accepted.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
I was going to say, if you want to see the demo, I'm sure you can also do it in the coffee break.
Yeah, I can do
come
it.
see
Yeah,
Stuart.
I can spin a demo up. It's all on my laptop using the DevNet Sandbox, and it's got all the viral tools installed into it as well. I can give you the links to any of that if you want to get up and started on that. Everything on DevNet, 100% free. Even the sandboxes, you can reserve them for a day.
Thank you.
Ooh, sorry, 7 days. Thank you.
Thank you.